It's a particular honor for me, first of all, to speak after Jochen Scholl, who I've known for quite some time and which also was shaping very important for my career. What I learned also from talking to you and having the possibility for exchange, and similarly to go along the side of Peter, and where Krems also has played an important role for me, where I regularly had speeches and taught classes. But I have to admit, it is already almost 8 years that I've been participating at CEDEM, actually back then with a workshop. So it is really a pleasure for me to be back here and to see so many familiar faces, where we have worked in various projects, in various research endeavors, including Fiorella, that was also helpful to creating the EVOD ID conference. But now I want to explain that, for those that who do not know me, I'm originally from Austria, so I spent quite some time in Vienna for 15 years, and then about 6 years ago I fled basically the city, not so much because there was a reason for me to flee, but more an opportunity to work in the practical field, to actually work on election observation, so really connecting my main research domain, where we were able to feed back to the states that tried to do that. And in the end, that brought me actually to come to Estonia, a very little country, if you may say so. So basically we are talking about a population of about 1.3 million. The country nevertheless is about the size of Switzerland or the Netherlands, right, in terms of the size. So it is not very densely populated. So there are about 30 inhabitants per square kilometer. Also, the other issue that we have in Estonia is a decrease of population. So we lose about 2% of the population every year. So they go to work abroad, they go to for studying abroad, but some of them also come back, and then there are also some crazy members of the European Union member states that actually move there. So I try to do my part to actually reduce this number, and it actually is going down. So Estonia is a former Soviet state. It has transitioned quite quickly, so became a member of the European Union in 2004, and since 2011 is also having the euro currency, which they value very highly. But that is actually not the main thing that we generally know Estonia for. We also don't know it for the white nights, which actually are very beautiful at this point and time of the year. It was really a great thing to be waking up or to the sun that is already quite high rising, because it rose at 4 o'clock and it sets only at 11 o'clock, and it will continue to expand the day for longer. What you see here is actually a picture of the old town, which is also quite nice. It's nice and medieval. Some of you have been there already for various occasions to talk about the digital state, right? So talking about information society. So Estonia has basically used an opportunity when they were able to start from scratch at the beginning of the 90s to say, okay, we forget about paper and we use computers as a replacement for that. And that has, for a country that is actually quite secular, become like a new religion. And I would say that it's quite without compromise sometimes, and that's for someone that comes from a more established country, let's put it that way, is sometimes actually even shocking, right? Because they just change certain paradigms, and they have to learn now to do the transitioning themselves, because they're now in a stage where they have to replace IT systems, where they cannot just introduce new systems and replace paper-based processes, but they have to replace IT systems, and they have now exactly the same challenges that other countries in Western Europe had to master beforehand or are in the process of mastering. But let me give you some numbers. So basically Estonia claims to have 100% connection for all its public information or public infrastructure. Basically all governmental organizations have web pages, have internet access, all schools have that. Programming is part of the syllabus of general public schools. The entire country is covered by broadband, either using actual fiber technology or using mobile broadband. 75% of homes have broadband. I can give you my own figure. I have half a gigabyte per second fiber internet connection for 50 euros a month. at home, and it actually is 500 megabit, and it's synchronous, not asynchronous. So really, having good internet access is a real asset. And the really interesting thing is that they only have 4 internet connections to abroad, really. They have 2 lines to Finland, they have 1 landline to Sweden, and 1 to Frankfurt. So actually they are investing quite a bit in those connections, and they don't have any connection on the landline to the neighboring countries. Just take that apart, as long as if you don't see Finland also as a neighboring country or Sweden. So the other interesting thing is that they have transformed their way of doing things completely to the digital world, and they could do so because they have a very strong knit network of people actually growing up together, people actually identifying themselves by having a common enemy, like Vladimir Putin or the Russian Federation, and that is actually quite unifying. And they also say that now that we have our own state, we have to stick together and defend it, and we have to build it. So basically there is not this usual doubting of this strategy, because so far it is working. So basically all the banks and the digital ID center that is in charge of rolling out the digital ID, they collaborated together, and they said, people, if you do e-banking, you can do so very easily. You can use one-time passwords, transactional numbers, like we use also here in Austria, but you can only use that for transactions lower than 1,000 euros when the ID was introduced. And they have lowered that amount to 400 euros today. So if they want to transfer more than 400 euros, they have to use the digital identity. Something that Austria, despite very similar conditions and also setting the path for the digital ID, didn't manage. But that basically leads to the fact that 99% of bank transfers are done electronically, 95% of the income tax declarations are done electronically, which also has to do to some extent with the flat tax system that they have and very easy tax declarations. So you can do a tax declaration by text message. So just because you get back, you will be reimbursed this amount of money based on the pre-filled information and going back. And that's what they're usually best known for, is that they also provide internet voting. So 1/3 of the votes cast, almost 1/3 of the votes cast last year's parliamentary election were done using the internet. So it is quite a digital state, and actually we have even a dogma, we could even say there is Estonia, right? And that's also how it is being seen. So you can actually go to estonia.com or estonia.com and you find quite some information about the digital state, and it becomes almost like this branding a nation picture that Estonia is portraying to the outside world. So generally when you look at any article about Estonia, it would usually start in the same way. There is this tiny little country, former Soviet state, that has decided to use the internet for all of the things. They do bank transfers online, they do declare the taxes, and they even vote online. And then the story goes on about whatever else there is, right? It might be about the social system, it might be actually about alcohol consumption, but it will always start with this narrative. And that's what Estonia managed to do, and that makes it quite interesting. And I want to be also honest, coming from a different context, going to this new context is also sometimes quite challenging. So like the understanding of data protection is something completely different what the Estonians understand by it than what you have here in the Austrian context. So as such, it's also quite interesting to see a prime minister who happens to be actually 1 year younger than myself, which also is a shocking experience, but still, that is also how Estonian public administration is. They are actually quite young, so middle management is usually mid-30s, right? And upper management usually 40s. And they all hope to get out of that system to have a better job, usually abroad, that is better paid, right? I mean, that is also to some extent, but it also has to do with the transition. But some of them are also really proud of their country and they want to shape it, so I don't want to underestimate that. But anyway, the Prime Minister went on YouTube and published a video of his own casting a vote online, right? So I mean, he did that, and you can actually still find it online if you want. So it's quite also a measure how he explains the digital state, and he's really outgoing and promoting that. So that is actually the thing that I'm interested in. So what was making the final decision for me to go to Estonia was I want to see how that really works. How is it to actually sign digital signatures, not only with the state, but also with private parties? And that really makes a difference. So I landed to attend a project meeting in Thessaloniki. I get out of the plane, I get an email from our secretary, "Dear Robert, we have a problem. Can you sign this certificate for our student? He needs it today." And I'm like, oh shit, how can I do that? And then I remembered that I have actually this app on my mobile phone that allows me to sign digitally. So by the time I arrived at the terminal building, I had signed his certificate, sent it back to the secretary, and the student had his grade. So it was really transforming how this goes. So basically, who are we? We are a small department of basically public administration research at Tallinn University of Technology. We offer research and teaching on all three levels, so bachelor, master, and PhD level. And we're trying to build a school of scholars. Right now we're about 30 staff members, and we want to build up e-government research as part of that. And that is my challenge or my task, and that's what I'm studying. So with that in mind, I would like to come to my main question and basically seeing if Estonia is such a digital state, do they actually also involve citizens, or is everything just planned centrally? And by that I want to look at first, what is co-creation? What are, as this general idea of involving citizens to design public services, what factors are actually influencing co-creation? I'm building here on the work that my colleagues have done in the LIPSED Framework 7 project of the European Union. What are typical outcomes of co-creation, and then looking at Estonian e-democracy efforts and seeing how that went. So what is co-creation? Co-creation, by the understanding that we have right now, is the involvement of citizens in the initiation and or co-production or design process of public services in order to co-create beneficial outcomes. And what it basically means is that when you do a service, you don't do it from the side of the public administration, but you try to see whether citizens already had an idea, want to do something, or can be involved in actually implementing this project. And that's what co-creation is about. So there are three main types that were identified as part of the LIPSED project. And the first one is to have citizens as co-initiators, which basically means that they set the idea and then it gets implemented by the public hand. Then having them as a co-designer, where you not only have that there should be a statue on a certain topic, but there will be also a playground that is designed along the lines of the ideas of the citizens. And then you can have them as co-implementers, which would actually be something for Estonia to finally implement, that is recycling, right? So it would be something that is driven by citizens, that is actually something where they have to also help implement it, because without their help, it is actually not going to work. So what are typical factors when we look at it? On the governmental side, it's very much driven by context, meaning depending on the state government traditions and what influence room they give to co-creation, right? So is it part of the general culture? And that actually also influences the attitude of public officials, which are generally not so fond of involving citizens, partly also due to an image that has to do, oh, they don't know what are real issues, because we know what the real issues are. And so that usually they're relatively negative. And also public organizations need to be able to involve citizens in their processes, and that is also not always the case. So on the citizen side, what we see as one of the important things is that the attitude of citizens towards participation. And here we have, for example, one thing in Estonia. Estonians don't like to participate generally. They're really reluctant to go on the streets. They're reluctant to try to influence public administration because they think that it's actually ineffective and useless. That's generally the picture. But then again, they say, okay, it's our only chance to rule our state, so actually it's not so bad in the end. But it is really something where that is important. So what is the attitude of citizens? What is their experience? So it can be a requirement that there is social capital, so that there are already groups or organizations that are active. But social capital can actually also be the result of co-creation. So when you start such an initiative, certain people come together that otherwise would not have something to discuss and actually will be able to exchange. And sometimes that is actually sustained, and that is also a bit of an issue, because normally the financial support for such initiatives is only when the project is there, and afterwards there becomes the problem of further financing. So financial stability is really troubling for some of those organizations or some of those initiatives, because they basically have to go back, right? Also from organizations that normally have nothing to do with the topic. And last but not least, political attention can be an influential factor. So sometimes, actually, it is good that the politicians do not spend any time on the project, because this allows it from actually finding consensus. And then on the other hand, sometimes political attention can help the co-creators to actually maintain and sustain their campaigns, because they think that it's actually useful and necessary. And we'll see that also in our Estonian case later on, what can happen on that. So what can be the outcomes of co-creation? So it can be suggestions for improving efficiency, to actually develop new products and new services. And that's actually where the idea of co-creation originally comes from, because basically marketing in the area of commercial services recognized not early on, but some 5 to 10 years ago, that actually citizens or the consumers are the best indicators what are the upcoming trends. Think about Levi's, for example. They have their online store where you can customize your own jeans. And basically, through that, Levi's gets all the market information they need, what is going to be the trend in the coming year, by just looking what people design most by themselves. So that is actually where it comes from. So having co-creation as part of the process is sometimes already good enough, right? Because sometimes just being able to say, okay, we involved the citizens, they were able to express their thoughts, enhances the legitimacy of certain initiatives already. So that can be an aim in itself. So sometimes there is this reluctance to actually replace existing services, so it actually becomes a new channel, an additional channel to existing services. The other issue that we have with it is that it is sometimes very fuzzy, right? So it sometimes comes very early in, sometimes it's very hard to grasp, because you don't know who to talk to, right? So who's going to be the representative of those initiatives? So sometimes, also the other issue is that who is interested in those processes is usually not those that normally do not participate. So those that are already activated are those that use those new channels best, right? So similar thing, which we see also with other e-participation initiatives, that those that are politically interested are those that use those channels firsthand and use it to actually even gain more impact onto the political process. And that actually sometimes can be a problem with a lack of diversity, so that actually minority groups do not get included if you do not have that in the design of your co-creation initiative. So having those parameters or this framework in mind, let's come to the Estonian sphere. So Estonia was driven when implementing e-government really mainly by trying to increase efficiency and effectiveness. So basically, when they wanted to introduce the digital ID, it was something that they considered necessary, because using the bank identification, so logging into your online banking and then going to digital services, was considered not safe, was not considered working well enough. Because what is if the bank identifies a person wrong and then they file a tax return, right? So just all of those issues. So basically, the digital ID was something to replace ineffective services that were there in the first place, and then try to implement that. So what we're looking at is really mainly e-democracy, seeing when Estonia wants to make everything digital, do they also want to have political life digital? And here we can see on the government side, there were two main initiatives. On the first, Today I Decide, TOM, which was quite well praised in 2001. And then we had Osale.ee in 2007, and I'll come to their story in a bit. We have hardly any civil society-led initiatives. There is recently a new Citizen OS, which basically should provide a whole ecosystem for citizen participation, basically also citizen to citizen, building social capital. And then there was one hybrid initiative, the so-called Rahva Kogu. I probably do not pronounce it correctly because I haven't mastered Estonian as well as my little daughter who is 3, and she of course speaks better Estonian than German. So Rahva Kogu basically means People's Assembly, and I will also come to them in a bit. So if we take this political process of information acquisition, opinion formation, and decision making, and then on the other hand, we look at the IT complexity, we can take those initiatives, including the e-voting case that we just briefly talked about before. We can say that Tom is a very basic unidirectional possibility to propose ideas. Osale was very similar, also being able to feedback on existing ideas. Rahva Kogu as a bidirectional, blended online and offline version of co-creation. And then last, we have the e-voting as a transactional service that is actually quite IT challenging as well, but also implementing mainly the decision phase. So let me come back to the cases. So or the e-democracy instruments, as we could say. So in 2001, sorry for the mishap, not 2011 of course. So in 2001, Tom was launched as a possibility to make proposals. For those of you that know the Austrian context, it's basically a Volksbegehren. So basically you propose a new law or an idea for a new law for changing something. So it's basically agenda setting. There was early on a formulation of good practice. They wanted to ensure somehow what could be good things that people comment on. They also started to think, okay, maybe we need a little bit more than just the possibility to propose new laws. Maybe we also need the possibility to discuss them and to be able to discuss law proposals. And that basically is an e-consultation service as such with the Osale. It was developed in 2006, and finally in 2007, after the first hype about Tom was going down, they started this new platform, Osale, which kind of was also promoted as an improved Tom portal. By the end of the year, there were already some 6 consultations, 150 registered users. And the problem was that this was about what it stayed on for the next couple of years. There was a public campaign in 2009 where politicians actually said, you can meet with me. I think it was even the Prime Minister. And so he tried to promote Osale, but it gave a peak in traffic, but didn't really change much on the number of proposals and the discussions. In 2011, the change of the coordinator happened, and then the portal was about to die because it was revived a bit in the OGP action plan for the Open Government Partnership. It was analyzed and seen if you could go forward with that, and in 2015 it actually was terminated. Also something about Estonia, which they're quite brutal at, if something doesn't work, finally it really gets terminated. So when we wanted to look into it more in detail, we really had to use Google Archive to look at some of the pages because they're just not accessible anymore. They're just gone, right? So let me come to this other example of the Rahva Kogu. The Rahva Kogu is the People's Assembly. It was something that was initiated by the elite, basically. So it was initiated by members of the administration of the Estonian president. The Estonian president, Toomas Hendrik Ilves, is one that is also part of the Estonian digital narrative. He loves to talk about Skype being programmed in Estonia. He loves to talk about e-government and to promote that with everyone. He handed over to the Japanese Prime Minister also his digital ID card and similar things like that. So there are really many things happening on this side. So on the other side, there were NGOs supporting this initiative and supporting the president's office. So they built an online platform where people could crowdsource ideas. There was no limitation in participation, and they came up with quite a number of ideas. And then there was a one-day face-to-face meeting where they resembled a proportional representation of the population. Right? So they really tried to have a sample of the population. In the end, again, there were mainly those people that were already part of the political process. They came forward with 15 proposals for improving laws. And a year later, 3 out of those 15 proposals were actually implemented, and 4 were adopted as kind of ideas for building a coalition. However, it was a one-time thing, because people were actually expecting that it would be an implementation of all 15 recommendations. It was actually people that were able to feed in all of those ideas anyway into the process because they had the experience. So the co-creation in there was really limited. Estonian internet voting, I'm not going to talk much about it, other than it's the only country in the world that has internet voting for all of its elections without any preconditions, other than that you have to have an Estonian ID card, which also was mandated together with issuing the national ID card. So every Estonian has the card, they also have the PIN codes, they might just not use it, but they have the possibility to do so. And so in 2002 to 2005 there were some legal debates. They did a constitutional review. They said, okay, we just have to change a little bit of the interpretation of our constitution. And they ran a test pilot, so where should we put the Statue of Liberty? In Tallinn city. And they had the first e-enabled elections in 2005. So that was kind of like proving the concept right. It was done on the municipal level. Then there was a second phase of the development. They realized that by 2011, after a growth phase, that they need to improve on the services, and here comes my practical part in there. So basically, I was involved in drafting this review report of the Estonian internet voting system. And then in the third phase, which is lasting now since 2012 to 2015, the system was actually improved and includes also possibility to verify the vote. But people are using it. You see a quite impressive growth rate. Also starting off with 2% of the eligible or of the votes cast, right? Also, some people might recognize that figure from elsewhere. And then it grew up to 31.7% in last year's election. I would guess if the elections would take place this year, they're not, but next year, the next ones, this number will be even higher. It is actually quite a complicated form of electronic democracy, got a lot of attention, and basically is proving the Estonian narrative right in the end. So it actually is quite important for them to keep it up. It needs time to build the infrastructure and trust, and they took a step-by-step approach. Nevertheless, coming back to the co-creation aspect, so what is in there for the citizens other than being able to cast their vote, then we have to say that with internet voting, there is no possibility other than actually casting your vote, but it's nothing different. So there are no initiatives that would be able to, for example, you could beforehand identify how much are you aligned with the political parties, or is one party for you preferential, anything like that. So there is nothing in co-creation that I see in internet voting. However, with the other two initiatives, there is a little bit more happening there, but where you can see that in the Rahvakogu, basically the citizens were co-designer. I wouldn't say that they were co-implementer, because those that actually were in this People's Assembly, they were not the ones that represent the general public, but rather the elite. That's why I would not say that they were actually implementing this as well. And then when we look at Tom and Osalee, they were basically just initiators of ideas, and then the administration had to take it over. Nevertheless, the only thing that works to date, and basically because of the political support and because of the support of the decision makers, is internet voting. All other initiatives basically have failed in Estonia when it comes to citizen participation. And while we do not have any answer why that is the case, I mean, I have some suspicions, partly have to do with the lack of this participation culture, but that can be built, right? On the other hand, I think that people have so many ways to influence the politicians easily, because it is such a small and condensed society, that they sometimes just don't need to have formalized ways of interaction. But we need to investigate that even further. So, social capital, political attention was lacking in case of Tom, and not embedded in the wider deliberative aspect. So let me come to a summary. Estonia has branded its nation using internet voting, and that was basically the final concrete block that helped to manifest that narrative. Also means that this is their weakest link. If internet voting falls, like in other countries, the digital state or this narrative is at danger, right? But internet voting as such is not an e-democracy, nor is it co-creation. And that's what we need to see. It is actually just public service delivery that could be, if actually the service is changed, provide also participatory aspects in it. So, is Estonia an e-democracy? I would have to say today, no, it is not. It is a digital state, yes, but it lacks the participatory aspects. And that is definitely something where further initiatives should be going, and what probably is not the area where much can be learned from Estonia as such of a success model, but basically also if those issues are lacking in your country, probably it's also not going to work. So that is what can be learned at this time, and I'm looking forward to discussing co-creation even more in a little while. And before that, looking forward to your question. Thank you.